Okay, hello and welcome. And I got some new action figures to look at today. And we got Masters of the Universe Revelation He-Man from the Masterverse collection. So this is the first of two Masterverse figures that I bought. I bought two of them today, and I'm sure you can guess who the other one is because if you're going to have any He-Man figures, you need to have He-Man and Skeletor. The other two figures in this assortment right now are Mossman and Evil Lyn. I think they were sold out of Evil Lyn. They did have Mossman, but I've only got so much money I can spend right now. So I went ahead and got He-Man and Skeletor. Thankfully, this is a week where I don't have any big bills to pay, so I was able to afford to do this. So I've never opened one of these packages before, so this is going to be interesting. But I can see there are all kinds of folds and pieces of tape and everything that's going to keep this closed. But I'm thinking this looks like this will be the simplest way to open it, is by slitting the tape on this side of the package. And it looks like once you do that, the whole thing will just kind of come apart. So hopefully I'm correct about that. And I think I've got all the pieces of tape torn or cut. And voila! Just came open very simply. So that's good. Mattel's DC Universe line opened up in a similar way. And Marvel Universe, or Marvel Legends, sorry, that tends to open up in a similar way. Most of your Hasbro 6-inch figures tend to open up that way. So we got them out of the box. And inside the box, there is another piece of plastic over the whole figure. I don't know if I like that very much because it's just another piece of plastic that I'm going to have to throw away. And then we can finally get a good look at He-Man and his accessories, which he comes with, of course, Sword of Power. He comes with the shield, which looks a lot like the Alfredo Alcala design of the shield. And two hands, so we can be swapping out his hands, so that's good. And He-Man came out with no trouble, no rubber bands. So maybe I do like that plastic tray. If that's what caused the lack of rubber bands, I'm in love with the plastic tray. The plastic tray is my new best friend. And then we've got his shield, which I'm looking at it here. He's got some soft plastic straps that'll wrap around his arm and grip to. Both of these hands that are in the accessories are gripping hands. The hands that are on the figure are an open hand, traditional, like the original He-Man figure, and a solid closed fist, which can't hold anything. But it's good for punching, isn't it? So maybe I'll get an extra one of these and make a Thunder Punch He-Man out of it. It should be pretty easy because he's got the H on the front, like Thunder Punch He-Man. So I really just need to repaint it. I guess technically it's supposed to be kind of shield-shaped, but I could probably cut out some little bits of plastic to go around it and wouldn't be a problem. So looking at the figure, here I'm going to tilt this down a little bit and then hopefully we can see the figure a little better as I look at it. It is very different from the Masters of the Universe Classics, even though it's supposed to be a similar scale. I think these are technically supposed to be 7-inch figures, and Classics are supposed to be 6-inch figures, but Classics stand closer to 7-inch anyway. I just happen to have my Masters of the Universe Classics He-Man figure here, the Ultimate version that Super 7 put out, which was the best thing Super 7 ever did, was those Ultimate figures. Like, Super 7 has been kind of hit or miss for me, but I do love those Ultimate figures. They did such a great job with those, and this is my favorite He-Man figure of all time. So, looking at them right next to each other, the Masterverse version does indeed stand a little taller. The colors of this one are more accurate to the original toy, but also add a lot more detail. So he's got like an orange belt and orange cuffs, but you can tell that they, put a little more detail into it. Some parts are light orange, some parts of it are dark orange. The boots and the loincloth are the same sort of burgundy color you remember from the original one. It's just got some more shading to it. Whereas this one, loincloth is brown, boots are brown. This is a more similar color to the Origins figure, which I happen to have the Origins figure here too, so we can compare those. The skin tone on this one is a little more light. It's not quite as dark as the Origins figure, which kind of disappoints me a little bit for reasons I'll get into a little later. You can see that he's got the same, even though the brown doesn't quite match up and the skin tone doesn't quite match up, the orange is the same on the original figure. And mine, I put the vintage head on there and an actual vintage harness, which holds the sword better than the Origins version. But from what I understand, the head joints on these are exactly the same as the ones on the Origins figures, so I thought I would swap out the heads and see how the Masterverse figure looked with the vintage style head. And unfortunately, like I said, the skin tones don't quite match up 100%. So if you were going to do this, you would need to either paint the face to match the body or paint the body to match the face. One or the other. But maybe at some point they'll put out a body that matches this a little more closely in terms of skin tone. Who knows? But I think that head looks pretty good on there. So if you're one of these people who I've seen a lot of people online saying they don't like the Revelations head, you can always get an extra Battle Armor He-Man and pop that head on there. And I think it looks pretty good. It's not quite as muscular as, oops, I was bragging on how well it held that sword, and it just flung out. So it's not quite as muscular as the Origins body, or as muscular as the Classics body. And I don't necessarily think that that's out of accuracy of the cartoon, because from what I've seen on the cartoon, he looks pretty dang buff. But let's go ahead and put the Revelations head back on there. I don't have a problem with this head sculpt. I think it's a fairly nice head sculpt. It's got that sort of like Mona Lisa smile to it, like the Classics Prince Adam head had, the smiling head on that. So it's not a bad head. The hair has that sort of windswept look, like the vintage has that I like. It's a little longer, obviously, but I think it looks good. I think it's a good-looking head, like especially for this figure, so I don't really have a problem with it. Just looking at the figure itself, the only thing I really have a problem with is I think that this wristband itself is kind of ridiculously huge. Like, I get that they were trying to make it look how on the original figure he had a bigger wristband on one side than the other, but this is just kind of like cartoonishly big. So I'm going to take it off, because you can actually remove that. And while I'm at it, I'm going to put this hand on here. And now he's just got one wristband, like how Alfredo Alcala drew him in the early books, where he just had the one wristband. So this joint seems a little frozen, but I was able to get it loosened up. He's got double joints at the elbows, so that's pretty good. Oh, the hand came off. I guess I didn't have that in there as well as I thought. It's a tiny little peg that holds that on really small. But there, now I've got it in there. Hopefully it'll stay. Let's see if we can get the shield on with this hand, or if I have to switch back to the open hand. Looks like I'm going to have to switch to the open hand. You could probably get that on there with some work, but for the sake of the video, I think it'll just be easier just to have the open hand on there. And then he can hold the shield just fine. It does seem a little loose on here, probably without the gigantic wristband, because I think that it's probably made to fit over that. So let's see how it fits over that. Put that back on there. If we take off this hand, let's see if we can get the wristband off of this wrist. I don't know if it's glued on or if it's just really tight. I think it might be glued on, though. Even if it's glued on, it's a separate piece, and it should come off if you were to heat it with a hairdryer or dip it in some hot water for like a minute or so. It should soften it up enough you could peel it off of there. And then if you really wanted to, if you bought two of them, you could put two of these short wristbands on there if you were wanting to do something like that. So I'm going to leave that hand off because I want to put the gripping hand on there so that he can hold the sword. Alright, so now we got them put back together. Let's see if we can get this shield on and if it'll stay on with the... Yep, there we go. You can... These soft rubber straps, they go over the giant gauntlet on that side very easily. And they fit right in between like that, so that's good. And now it fits on there all snugly. So my advice to you would be, if you don't like that giant wristband, and you're planning on displaying him just with the sword, just go ahead and take it off. And maybe if you want to have the second shorter wristband on there, just buy another one and swap that on there. Use the rest for a custom or something, I don't know. If you do like him with the shield, even if you don't like the giant wristband, it's going to be mostly hidden. You can see kind of poking out a little bit there. But he'll hold the shield a lot better. So just leave that on there and just pose him so you can't really see that giant wristband very well. See, if you posed him like that, he'd look fine. If you do like the giant wristband, then just leave it on there, period. So that's easy. So let's see if I can get the sword in here. And his hands feel like very tight. Like the plastic isn't very soft. It doesn't have as much give as you would imagine a hand would have. But I was able to get it in there anyway. You need to kind of pinch it between the thumb and the forefinger to get the sword in there. I tried to just kind of slide it in the top, but it doesn't want to do that. So he looks pretty cool. And the sword is really long, like in proportion. Like, normally we think of the sword as, on the original toy as being kind of short like this. I think the length of this is probably closer to how it was on Filmation. And it's certainly closer to how it is on the Revelations series from the artwork that I've seen. I like having different types of power swords. I like having the Alfredo Alcala style power sword, and the Filmation style power sword, and one that's close to the vintage toy, and this one, which has got its own sort of design to it. Here, I'm going to turn it sideways so we can get the whole thing on the screen at once. And it's a nice sort of design. It's definitely recognizable as He-Man's Sword of Power, but it's also got its own little flares to it and eccentricities and differences. This is, in my opinion, a good example of redesigning something that's completely iconic and putting your own spin on it. That's a good job. In fact, the whole figure, I think, is a good job of that. Like, you can tell that this is a unique version of He-Man. It doesn't look like the Filmation cartoon. It doesn't look like the Alfredo Alcala comics. But it's definitely recognizable just right off the bat as, oh, hey, that's He-Man. So that's good. Now, his armor does unbuckle in the back, and it's got a buckle very similar to what you've always seen on He-Man figures. Very, very similar to the buckles on the original vintage figures and the 2000X figures, and the Origins figures, and some of the classics even have this. This one seems like it's a little bit more stubborn, but I can probably get it loose. The buckling scheme, the buckling pattern of this is, I'm just going to leave it on there. Just trust me, it'll unbuckle. I might just want to put some heat on it or something. But it's very similar to how the 2000X one's done, where there's the two buckles on the side, but it's still solid in the middle, so you're just supposed to kind of pull it over the character's head. And in this case, you can actually remove the head of He-Man, so it shouldn't be that difficult to get it off. So let's look at the articulation a little bit, since I haven't opened one of these figures before. He's got, ball joints at the biceps. He's got a swivel at the mid-bicep. He's got double-jointed elbows, which I mentioned before. I like those. Good articulation on the wrists. Very similar to the Origins figures. I would rather it pivoted this way, though, than the other way, so that way he could hold aloft his magic sword a bit better. I mean, you could still get like a pretty good pose out of it like that, but having it pivot this way so that he could actually point the sword forward, that would be best, I think. So, the joints here seem to be ball joints at the waist. He's got a ball joint at the abs, which gives him all kinds of posability like that, so that's neat. There is a twist at the waist, and then at the hips, like I said, it's ball jointed. And then there's another, it's kind of obscured by the loincloth, but there's another articulation right here, so you can twist it that way. It's not as well hidden as it is on the classics versions, but, you know, it still kind of hides it a little bit. You could probably get a little bit of posing out of it and still have it look pretty decent. You got, of course, a boot cut here, double jointed knees, and then this kind of rocker articulation on the feet. So, and his head, of course, is ball jointed. We already saw that. And the ball joint itself is movable. So that will give you a little more posability as far as the head sculpt goes. I can have him looking up pretty well. I can have him looking down pretty well. You know, I can kind of tilt his head a little bit that way, so he looks kind of perplexed. He's not sure what he's looking at. Like he sees Tila and isn't sure why she shaved the side of her head. Modern cartoons. What are you gonna do? So, but yeah, this is a really cool figure, and I really like it. I know a lot of people have been particular about the H on his chest rather than the Iron Cross. And then I've seen people like, well, it's actually not an Iron Cross. It's, oh, I don't care, whatever. Like, most modern people are going to see it and think it's an Iron Cross. But I think it looks good, and it is a traditional He-Man symbol. Like, literally every vintage figure of He-Man had this symbol on his chest, with the exception of the very first one. So, and you know, if you don't like the H and you wanted to have, you know, the Iron Cross on there, you could probably switch the, well, let's see if I can do it. Why not? Let's do it right now. We could probably put a vintage style armor onto him very easily. So let me get this off. And since that one's being finicky, I'm just going to slide it over the whole top of the figure like that. So now we got a topless He-Man. And let me get my Origins figure that I had over here that I put the vintage armor onto. And let's go ahead and see how he looks with the vintage armor. And hopefully it'll go on there. That seems like it's kind of a tight fit at that middle part. Let's do the straps here first. Because if we can't do it with the straps, it's not going to matter. Okay, so I got this hooked in the back, but then the strap on the side came loose again. Let's see. It is a little bit of a tight fit. I think I can maybe get it. Well, then it came loose in the middle again. You might have to work with it some, but I think you could probably get it done. It might even be possible to get the Origins armor on here, but I don't know, because you have to take the whole figure apart, basically, to get that off. And it came loose at the top here again. But I think if you applied some heat to it and stretched it out a little bit, you could probably get that to work. If the lack of the cross is bothering you. I think it can still, you can use the vintage one. It's just going to take a little work. So, but like I said, I don't really have a problem with the newer one, so I'm going to put it back on. That was just for the benefit of anybody considering trying that. It might also be worth trying the Origins version on there, or not the Origins, the Classics version on there, because that one might fit a little better. Let me take his head off again, and then put that back on. There's one other thing about this figure that kind of bothers me, and I'm going to get to that in a second, which I didn't mention before, but might as well mention it now, since I have the sword out of his hand, is it does not have any sort of designated sheath for the sword, not a strap like the 2000X or the Classics version has, and not a little slot like the Origins one has. So you got to go just full old school vintage and just stick it in the back of the strap. But it seems to be staying in there pretty well, so that's good if you want to do that. All in all, I'd say this is a great figure, and it's definitely worth getting, especially if you don't already have the Origins version and you want a He-Man that's pretty much in this scale. He's a good one to have. I think I probably like the Origins ones better. Did I say Origins? Or yeah, if you want one that's in the Classics scale, and he's gotten kind of expensive. Like, this is a good one to get, like, to kind of fill that spot, I think. But, you know, it's got some issues to it, I will admit that. But I don't think it's got anything that's a deal breaker for me. I'm glad I bought this. This will be a worthy addition to my collection. I'm very happy with it. So that's pretty much it for this time. I will have the Skeletor video coming up, so keep an eye out for that one. Thank you very much for watching. I hope you enjoyed the video. If you did, please do all the fun YouTube stuff below, like liking and subscribing and leaving a comment. Which do you think is the best He-Man action figure of all time? Which is your favorite He-Man action figure of all time? Are you like so old school that you go all the way back to the vintage? Do you like the classics one? Do you like the origin one? Do you like this one? Do you think this is the best one? Maybe it's 2000X. Maybe you're one of these weirdos that thinks New Adventures of He-Man is the best version. Probably not. But anyway, that's it for this time. We'll see you next time. Bye.